She thought it would just be a favor, a one-night lie to get through dinner with her judgmental family. But when the single dad she paid to act as her fiancé reached into his wallet, what she saw inside shattered everything she thought she knew and everything she thought she deserved. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin. Rain hammered against the cafe window as Amelia Parker sat across from the man she'd just met 20 minutes ago on Craigslist. Desperate times called for desperate ads, and she had offered $500 to any man willing to be her fake fiancé for one evening. Dinner. One lie. No touching. No kissing. Just a clean break from the endless questions from her family. And that's when James Monroe walked in, tall, quiet, with a warm but exhausted smile and a little girl's purple glitter hair clip accidentally still clinging to his hoodie. "You're the one who posted the ad?" he asked, voice a little husky, a little hesitant. "I am. You don't look like a liar." "That's a good start." He shrugged, sliding into the booth. "I'm a single dad. I've been making up bedtime stories for 5 years. I can fake anything for one night." They shook hands. By the time the check came, she had given him the family's address, his background story, and warned him that her father would likely test him like an FBI agent. What she hadn't expected was how easily James fit into her world. He held open doors, remembered the fake story they'd rehearsed, and when her aunt mocked Amelia for being unlovable, James reached across the table, squeezed her hand, and said, "I didn't know I could fall in love until I met her." Even her stone-faced father blinked. But it wasn't until dessert that things took a turn. When her little cousin spilled a drink on James, he reached into his wallet to pull out a folded napkin. And there, right there tucked between a few dollars and a drawing, was a photo of Amelia, laughing, her face windswept from the beach, a photo she didn't know existed. She froze. Her hand trembled. "Where did you get that?" James looked at the photo, paused. "I didn't think you'd recognize it, but I guess fate's done waiting." That's when Amelia realized this wasn't the first time they'd met, and it definitely wasn't a lie anymore. Amelia stared at the photo again, her stomach tightening. It was definitely her. Same smile, same faded denim jacket with a tear on the shoulder. That picture had been taken 4 years ago on a California beach trip she barely remembered, because that weekend, something unforgettable had happened. A child had gone missing. A little girl had wandered too far down the shore while her father dozed off on a towel. Amelia, then just a college student with no lifeguard training, had spotted the girl nearly swept away by the tide, and without thinking, she'd sprinted in. She dragged the child out, soaked and coughing, and stayed until the father woke up in a blind panic. They barely spoke. He'd held his daughter and cried. That was it. That was all. But now that child's father was sitting at her family's dining table, pretending to be her fiancé, and carrying her photo in his wallet. "You saved my daughter," James said softly, his voice barely a whisper against the clinking of forks and murmured family gossip around them. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "That day on the beach. I never got your name. I searched online. Everywhere. The news didn't mention you. Just said a passerby. I tried asking the lifeguards. They didn't know. But I remembered your face. And when I saw your ad this morning, I knew." She felt like the room was spinning. "You didn't tell me." James's eyes were steady. "Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. I wasn't going to respond. But then I saw the time and location, and I thought, maybe this isn't about faking anything anymore." Suddenly, the room felt too loud, too small. Amelia excused herself and walked to the kitchen, her chest heaving. James followed, slower, respectful. "I didn't mean to upset you." "I wasn't upset," she said. "I was overwhelmed." They stood there, between a tray of untouched rolls and a stack of dirty dishes. She looked at him differently now. He wasn't just a man who needed cash. He was a man who carried a folded photo of a woman who once saved his daughter. A man who could have lied, exploited that truth, used it as leverage. But he didn't. "You were kind to me tonight," she said. "Not just fake nice. Real kind. You stood up for me. You made them see me. I didn't do anything you didn't already deserve." She smiled. But in the dining room, things were unraveling. Her father was growing suspicious. Her mother was whispering to an aunt. The questions were coming, and neither of them was ready for the truth. Amelia straightened her back. "We need to go back out there." James nodded. "I've got your back." "You already had it once," she whispered, thinking about the photo again. Guess it's my turn now. And as they walked back in hand, this time without pretending, something in Amelia's heart shifted. Not because of the lie they were about to keep telling, but because of the truth they were finally starting to face. The room quieted the moment Amelia and James stepped back into the dining room. Her father, Raymond Parker, was already standing with his arms crossed, clearly having whispered to every sibling and spouse seated at the table. Her mother, Judith, sat stiffly, wine glass in hand, pretending to smile, but her jaw was clenched. James had seen war, literal combat, but nothing prepared him for the battlefield of suburban passive aggression that was the Parker family dining room. Raymond gestured toward the head of the table. "Son, I think we'd all appreciate it if you told us what your intentions are with my daughter." Amelia opened her mouth, but James gently touched her arm. "It's okay," he whispered. Then he faced them all. "I'm not here to impress anyone. I didn't show up to win points or play pretend. I'm here because your daughter asked me to be by her side. And when someone like her asks for help, you show up." Someone scoffed, probably her cousin Caleb, the real estate jerk who once tried to pitch her a pyramid scheme. James continued, voice calm. "I may not have a big name or a fat bank account, but I've got a daughter at home who knows what loyalty means, who knows that love isn't measured in gifts or job titles, but in actions. And Amelia," he turned to her, "has done more for a stranger than most people do for their own blood." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "Is that so?" Judith leaned in. "And what exactly do you do for work again?" James smiled, the kind that cut through pretension like a knife. "I'm a part-time delivery driver, full-time dad, and occasionally a volunteer at the children's ward on weekends." "You expect us to believe you can provide for someone like our Amelia?" "I don't expect anything," James said quietly. "But I'll say this. I've never let my daughter go to bed hungry. I've never missed a parent-teacher conference. I built her a bunk bed out of scrap wood and held her hand when she asked if her mother would ever come back. So no, I'm not rich, but I'm not a man who walks away." The silence was absolute. Then Amelia, chest tight with pride and something deeper, something warmer, stepped closer. "I asked him to be here," she said, "because I was tired of being judged for not having someone, tired of being pitted. But you know what's funny? No one answered. I ended up bringing the only man in this room I actually admire." Judith's wine glass nearly slipped from her hand. Raymond's nostrils flared. James blinked at Amelia. That hadn't been part of the script, but it was real. It was so real. Someone finally coughed. Then Caleb mumbled something under his breath about overdramatic theatrics. That's when James did something unexpected. He reached back into his wallet, pulled out the same worn photo, held it up. 4 years ago, she saved my daughter from drowning. I never got to thank her. I never got to tell her that because of her, my little girl started second grade last month and wants to be a marine biologist. So no, I'm not playing a role. I'm repaying a kindness the world never acknowledged." Gasps spread around the table like wildfire. Judith's mouth dropped open. Amelia's father stepped back. Someone actually whispered, "Is this real?" Amelia felt like the floor had vanished beneath her. She had forgotten that day, but he never had. And now the people who always doubted her, always belittled her, called her too soft, too naive, were speechless. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt seen. As everyone sat frozen in disbelief, a small voice cut through the tension like sunshine, breaking through thunderclouds. "Excuse me," said a tiny girl from the hallway, her curls bouncing. It was Grace, James's daughter. She had slipped inside when no one noticed, and she was holding something in her hand, a hand-drawn picture. It was of Amelia, James, and her. Underneath it read, "Our family." Amelia's heart cracked wide open. The room may not have understood them, but somehow Grace did, and that meant more than 1,000 empty blessings from a table full of doubters. Gasps rippled across the room as Grace stood quietly in the hallway entrance, small fingers still gripping the crayon-colored page. The picture trembled slightly in her hands, but her face beamed with shy, earnest pride. A triangle house, a stick-figure dad with messy hair, a smiling girl in pigtails, and beside them, a woman with long hair and a bright yellow dress. Underneath it all, in crooked 5-year-old handwriting, "Our family." No one moved, not even Raymond. Judith's wine glass, now forgotten, sat untouched. Her cousin Caleb's smirk was gone. Her aunt's gossiping whispers had died in her throat. The only sound in the room was the low humming of the chandelier and the muffled thunder still rolling outside. Amelia stared at Grace, her vision stinging with sudden emotion. That little girl, that sweet, gentle child, had seen something no one else had. No pressure, no money, no performance, just hope. Grace, James murmured, moving to his daughter. He crouched down, eye level, brushing a raindrop off her cheek. You weren't supposed to come in, sweetheart. I know, Grace whispered, but I wanted to give her this. She stepped forward and handed the picture to Amelia, then looked up at her with wide eyes. You made Daddy smile again. Amelia's throat tightened, so hard she could barely breathe. She knelt slowly, lowering herself until she was eye level with the girl. Did he stop smiling? Grace nodded. After Mommy left. He tried, but it wasn't the same. Not until today. James blinked rapidly, fighting tears. The room was dead silent. Amelia smiled and gently hugged Grace, cradling her as if she were something precious and fragile and entirely hers. Thank you, she whispered. I'll keep this picture forever. Grace smiled, then tiptoed back to James, who lifted her gently into his arms and kissed the top of her head. The weight of that moment sat like a stone in the middle of the table, undeniable and raw. Finally, Raymond cleared his throat, but the thunder in his voice was gone. James, I don't pretend to understand everything going on right now, but I'll admit, I misjudged you. James did not. He just held Grace tighter. Raymond continued. You showed something most men here wouldn't. You didn't come with a resume or a show-off story. You came with honesty. And maybe that's something I haven't respected enough. Amelia's breath caught. Was this her father backing down? Judith stood, her heels clicking softly on the tile. We were just surprised. That's all. Amelia faced her. You weren't surprised. You were embarrassed. You thought I was bringing someone below your standards. But he's the only person in this room who treats me with dignity. Her mother opened her mouth, then slowly closed it again. Amelia turned back to James. I know this started out as an act, a deal, but I don't want it to end like that. James met her eyes. Neither do I. I don't know where this goes, but I want to find out. And not because I need to prove anything to them, she nodded toward the table, but because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. James's eyes were warm and glassy. You're not the only one. Just then, the doorbell rang. Everyone turned. Amelia frowned. Who could that be? Aunt Marion went to answer it, muttering something about deliveries. But when she opened the door, her gasp was audible across the entire house. Standing on the porch was a sharply dressed man in a navy blue suit. Rain soaked the shoulders of his coat, but he held a covered case in one hand and wore a strange, familiar look on his face. Amelia Parker? He asked. She stepped forward. Yes. I represent St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, he said. Mr. Monroe recently made an anonymous donation that saved our pediatric therapy wing from closing. But after reviewing it, we realized something didn't add up. James stiffened. The man opened the case. Inside was a photograph, a letter, and a check with Amelia's name on it. I believe this was meant for you. Amelia stared at it. I don't understand. James stepped forward, gently. I sold my car, and a few things I'd kept from before. I didn't want to just fake being your fiancé. I wanted to repay what you gave me years ago, quietly. But then Grace drew that picture, and I realized. He turned to her fully. I don't want to say thank you anymore. I want to say I'm here. For good. If you'll have me. Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks. The fake was no longer fake. The kindness had circled back, and the love was real. For a moment, no one in the room said anything. Even the air felt heavier, like it was waiting to exhale. Amelia stared at the open case. The check inside wasn't small. It was significant, tens of thousands, easily. It had her name on it, but she hadn't done anything to earn it recently. Not in a way that most people would understand. But the man who stood across from her did. James Monroe wasn't just paying her back. He was trying to rewrite the ending of a chapter she didn't even remember starting. You try to give this to me anonymously? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. James nodded once, his voice steady. I didn't want it to be a transaction. I wanted it to be a thank you. A real one. Raymond, her father, who hadn't shown visible emotion in decades, rubbed his jaw. watching James with new eyes. He didn't say anything, but his silence wasn't disapproval anymore. It was humility. Amelia slowly walked over to the briefcase and closed it gently, not even touching the check. Then she looked up at James. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't save your daughter to collect a reward. I didn't even remember your face until tonight. I remembered yours every day." Those words, so simple, so full of weight, knocked the breath from her chest. "And if there's anything I want now," he continued, "it's not to make things even between us. It's to build something new. With you. If you want the same." She laughed through the tears now streaking down her cheeks. "You know what I really wanted tonight? Just someone to make my family stop seeing me as broken. Someone to sit beside me and pretend for one evening that I wasn't the disappointment in the Parker legacy." "You're not," James said without hesitation. "You're the bravest person in this room." Grace had walked up beside them again and clung gently to Amelia's hand. "You're pretty," the little girl said, with that unfiltered childlike honesty. "I hope you be my mommy." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't coached. It was just raw, innocent hope. The kind Amelia had forgotten how to hold. She dropped to one knee, level with Grace again. "Would that be okay with you?" Grace nodded hard. "You saved me once. Daddy says angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they wear messy ponytails and old jackets." Amelia laughed. That weekend at the beach came back now, the one she hadn't thought about in years. She remembered the wet sand in her shoes, the panic, the freezing cold ocean water, the way that little girl had clung to her neck, sobbing. She remembered holding her until her father came running, shirt half-buttoned and fear in his voice. She hadn't thought of herself as a hero then, just someone who saw a need and filled it. But now she saw what it had done, how it had grown into something far bigger. She rose slowly and looked around the room. Her family still stared, some with confusion, others with guilt. Her mother dabbed her eyes discreetly. Even Caleb looked like he might not have a snide comment for once. Then Amelia spoke, clear and strong. "I don't need approval from this table. I don't need praise or pride from anyone who can't see the person I've become. But I do know this. What I have right now is real. And I'm done pretending for your comfort." James looked at her like she had just lifted a mountain. And then, for the first time since entering that house, Amelia turned to him, placed a hand on his chest, and said, "Come home with me." It wasn't romantic fanfare. It wasn't forced. It was real, because home wasn't an address anymore. It was a promise. A few weeks later, Amelia and James sat together on the back porch of her small apartment, sipping coffee as Grace chased a butterfly barefoot across the lawn. The drawing still hung on the fridge, our family, crayon and all. She had turned down the check. Instead, they used the money James raised to donate to a scholarship fund in Grace's name for kids raised by single parents. And slowly, quietly, Amelia let him in, not just into her apartment, into her life, into the places she never let anyone touch. He rebuilt the leaky faucet. She taught Grace how to braid her hair, and together, they figured out what love meant without fairy tales. Some nights they talked for hours. Some nights they said nothing and just sat near each other, breathing the same air. James still drove deliveries during the week. Amelia still freelanced design projects from her laptop. Their lives weren't glamorous, but they were whole. And when Amelia finally invited her family to her new place for dinner, no one dared question her again. Especially not when Grace ran to answer the door and shouted, "Come in. Mommy made my favorite." It wasn't a performance. It wasn't pretend. It was truth, built from kindness, loyalty, sacrifice, and second chances. And when people asked how they met, James always smiled and said, "She saved my daughter's life once. I just came back to return the favor, and ended up finding a life of my own."